9 Golden Age stars who ruined their face with plastic surgery. They were the faces that defined an era. Timeless icons whose beauty launched 1,000 dreams, until they tried to stop time itself. The tragic irony of Hollywood's greatest stars isn't that they aged, it's what they did when they couldn't accept it. In their desperate quest to preserve the very thing that made them famous, they destroyed it forever. The saddest consultations I ever had revealed a renowned Beverly Hills plastic surgeon who worked from the 1960s through the 1990s were aging stars bringing in their own publicity photos from 30 years earlier and saying, "Make me look like this again." It was an impossible request that launched countless surgical disasters. These weren't just minor touch-ups or subtle refreshments. These were radical transformations that left beloved faces frozen, distorted, and ultimately unrecognizable. The very features that made these stars distinctive, that made them, vanished under the surgeon's knife. Most heartbreaking was the silent film legend who pioneered Hollywood beauty standards, only to become a cautionary tale when early experimental facelifts left her unable to form expressions. The woman once called America's sweetheart couldn't even smile for the cameras that had once adored her. Or the dashing leading man whose chiseled features melted into a shiny, immobile mask that shocked fans who remembered his natural magnetism decades earlier. They didn't just change their appearance, explained a Hollywood makeup artist who worked with many of these stars in their later years. They erased their history, the laugh lines, the expressiveness, the character that told their story, surgically removed like it was something to be ashamed of. What makes these transformations particularly poignant is that they happened before modern techniques existed. Today's celebrities benefit from subtle procedures developed through decades of refinement. These pioneers of plastic surgery were essentially guinea pigs, submitting to experimental techniques with catastrophic results. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of these surgical disasters is what they reveal about Hollywood's cruelest contradiction, an industry that worships youth while being fundamentally built on nostalgia. Stars trapped between these opposing forces often made choices that ultimately robbed us of seeing how their iconic faces would have naturally aged. Let's begin with the woman who helped build Hollywood itself, only to become one of its first plastic surgery casualties.
Well, it's very nice to be able to thank them all.
Mary Pickford, America's sweetheart frozen in time. Mary Pickford wasn't just a star, she was the star, co-founder of United Artists, the first actor to earn $1 million contract, the woman who helped invent modern celebrity. Her golden curls and expressive face made her the most beloved actress of the silent era. When people fell in love with the movies, they were falling in love with Mary Pickford, which makes what happened to her face in later years all the more tragic. Mary pioneered film acting, and unfortunately, she also pioneered celebrity plastic surgery disaster, explained a film historian specializing in silent cinema. She underwent some of Hollywood's earliest facelifts in the 1930s, when the procedures were essentially experimental butchery. Pickford's first facelift came around 1933 as she approached her 40s and struggled with her transition from ingenue roles. The surgery was performed with primitive techniques, essentially pulling skin tight and cutting away the excess, with little understanding of facial anatomy or the importance of underlying structures. These weren't the refined procedures of today, noted a plastic surgery historian. Early facelifts were brutal, simplistic operations. Skin was stretched like canvas over a frame with no consideration for natural movement or aging patterns. The results were immediately concerning. Friends noticed a strange tightness to Pickford's face, an unnatural smoothness that limited her once expressive features. But rather than serving as a warning, this first procedure began a pattern that would continue for decades. By the 1940s, after multiple surgeries, Pickford's face had taken on the frozen quality that would become her unintended legacy. Her skin was pulled so tight that natural facial movements became impossible. The expressive features that had communicated so much during silent films were locked in a perpetual mask. America's sweetheart turned mannequin, remarked a cinematographer who worked with her in her later years. The terrible irony was that the procedures meant to preserve her youth actually accelerated her retreat from public life. As surgical techniques evolved, Pickford continued seeking improvements, hoping each new procedure might somehow reverse the damage of previous operations. Instead, each surgery compounded the problem, stretching her features further from their natural state. By the 1960s, Pickford had become increasingly reclusive, rarely allowing herself to be photographed. When she did appear publicly, observers were shocked by her appearance, the too tight skin, the altered hairline from multiple lifts, and most disturbingly, the inability to form natural expressions. Douglas Fairbanks Jr., who had known her since childhood, reportedly didn't recognize her when they reconnected at an industry event in the late 1960s. After being told who she was, he later confided to friends, "It was as though someone had built a Mary Pickford statue with only a passing familiarity with her actual face." The woman who had once communicated volumes with the subtlest facial expressions could no longer smile naturally in her final years. When she received an honorary Oscar in 1976, she declined to attend the ceremony, sending a video message instead, carefully filmed to minimize the visual evidence of what had been done to one of cinema's most beloved faces. The saddest part was that Mary helped create Hollywood, then fell victim to its most destructive expectation, concluded the film historian. The very industry she built ultimately convinced her that her natural aging face was something to be erased rather than celebrated. While Pickford's surgical alterations reflected the primitive techniques of early Hollywood, our next subject took facial modification to an entirely different level, turning plastic surgery from private shame into public performance art.
Brave. He was a real war hero.
Was he?
And that's what I loved about him. He was so brave. He said,
Joan Rivers. When plastic surgery becomes the punchline. While not strictly a Golden Age star, Joan Rivers straddled Hollywood eras, beginning her career when many studio system legends were still active, then transforming herself through decades of procedures until she became perhaps the most famous plastic surgery addict in entertainment history. She went from sharp-tongued to stiff-faced, noted a longtime Hollywood columnist. The tragedy is that her frozen features became the joke, overshadowing her genuinely pioneering comedy. Rivers' relationship with plastic surgery began conventionally enough, a standard eye lift in her 30s, followed by a facelift in her 40s. But unlike most stars who denied having work done, Rivers took the opposite approach, making her surgical adventures part of her comedic persona. "I've had so much plastic surgery, when I die, they will donate my body to Tupperware," she famously quipped. Her honesty was refreshing in an industry built on illusion, but it masked a deeper truth. What began as maintenance had transformed into addiction. By her own admission, Rivers eventually underwent hundreds of procedures: facelifts, eye lifts, neck lifts, brow lifts, cheek implants, chin reduction, Botox, fillers, and countless minor tune-ups, as she called them. Joan used to carry her medical records in a suitcase, revealed a longtime friend. Not because doctors needed her history, but because she couldn't remember everything she'd had done. It was less a medical record than a renovation log. The cumulative effect transformed Rivers' once expressive face into something increasingly artificial. By the 1990s, her appearance had become so altered that it generated headlines independent of her comedy. Late-night hosts who once feared her sharp tongue now made her tight skin the punchline. What makes Rivers' case particularly fascinating is how she weaponized her own surgical modifications, using self-deprecation as both shield and sword. When critics commented on her appearance, she simply incorporated more plastic surgery jokes into her act. "Nobody laughs at me without my permission," she reportedly told her daughter after a particularly brutal tabloid piece about her appearance. "I'll make the joke first and better than they ever could." This strategy worked professionally. Rivers remained relevant and working until her death at 81, but the physical price was steep. Her final appearance was virtually unrecognizable compared to her younger self, not because of natural aging, but because of the accumulated effects of hundreds of surgical interventions. The saddest part wasn't what she did to her face, reflected a makeup artist who worked with Rivers in her later years. It was why she felt she had to do it. Joan once told me, "In this business, wrinkles aren't character, they're unemployment." While Rivers at least maintained her sense of humor about her transformed appearance, our next subject pursued facial modification with a disturbing intensity that shocked even surgery-obsessed Hollywood.
Out of my apartment thinking I was dating what?
Jocelyn Wildenstein, the cautionary tale Hollywood couldn't ignore. Though not a Golden Age star herself, Jocelyn Wildenstein serves as the ultimate cautionary tale that many aging Hollywood legends unfortunately failed to heed. Her transformation was so extreme, so bizarre, and so widely publicized that that it transcended mere plastic surgery to become a psychological case study in surgical addiction. "She didn't age, she mutated," remarked a Beverly Hills plastic surgeon who declined her as a patient in the 1990s. What happened to her face wasn't about maintaining youth. It was about transforming into something inhuman. Wildenstein's surgical odyssey reportedly began with a misguided attempt to please her then-husband, billionaire art dealer Alec Wildenstein, who allegedly appreciated big cats. According to widely circulated accounts, she pursued procedures specifically designed to give her feline features: high cheekbones, slanted eyes, and a flattened nose. The results were startling. Through multiple facelifts, eye-reshaping surgeries, cheek implants, lip augmentation, chin restructuring, and countless filler injections, Wildenstein transformed herself into something that horrified even surgery-tolerant Hollywood. "Her case represents the ultimate endpoint of surgical addiction," explained a psychiatrist specializing in body dysmorphic disorder. "When procedures are no longer about enhancement but transformation into a different species altogether, we've moved beyond cosmetic concerns into something much darker." What makes Wildenstein's case relevant to our Golden Age stars is how perfectly she embodies the dangers they all flirted with. Many of them took a few steps down the same path she followed to its extreme conclusion, the belief that surgical intervention could not just maintain, but actually improve upon nature. "I've had clients bring in her picture, not as inspiration, but as warning," revealed a high-end Beverly Hills aesthetic dermatologist. They'll point to her and say, "Promise me you won't let me go there." She's become the universal shorthand for surgical excess. Wildenstein reportedly spent over $4 million on facial surgeries, creating an appearance so distinctive that she can no longer move through the world anonymously. Her face has become a cultural reference point, appearing in everything from horror films to medical textbooks as an example of plastic surgery gone wrong. "The truly sad part is that she apparently believes she looks good," noted a Society columnist who interviewed her in the early 2000s. "There's a disconnect between how she sees herself and how the world sees her that speaks to how distorted one's self-image can become." While Wildenstein represents an extreme case, our next subject shows how even the most sophisticated, elegant stars could fall victim to the allure of surgical intervention, with results that betrayed everything their public image once represented.
Love and you want to go to bed with, and then you can work things out.
Zsa Zsa Gabor, Hollywood glamour frozen in place. Zsa Zsa Gabor built her career on three things: her 9 marriages, her witty one-liners, and her extraordinary beauty. As she aged, she became determined to maintain the latter at all costs, a decision that ultimately robbed her of the expressive face that had made her famous. "She kept the glam, but lost the expression," commented a longtime Hollywood photographer who documented her over decades. "Watching her face gradually freeze into immobility was like watching a vibrant painting slowly get covered in lacquer." Gabor's surgical journey began earlier than most of her contemporaries, with her first documented facelift occurring in the early 1950s when she was still in her 30s. This pioneering embrace of cosmetic intervention set a pattern that would continue throughout her long life. Zsa Zsa was brutally honest about aging. She hated it, recalled her former hairstylist. She used to say, "Darling, in Hungary we have saying, better to look good than to look real," and she lived by that philosophy. By the 1970s, after multiple facelifts, eye lifts, and other procedures, observers began noting the telltale signs of excessive surgery. The perpetually surprised expression, the tightness around the mouth that limited her smile, and the gradual disappearance of natural animation from her once expressive face. What made Gabor's transformation particularly poignant was that her persona had been built on vivacious charm and animated storytelling. As her face became increasingly immobile, she compensated with bigger jewelry, more elaborate wigs, and more flamboyant clothing, as if trying to distract from what was happening to her famous features. By the 1980s, her face barely moved on camera, noted a director who worked with her on television appearances. "We had to adapt our shooting style because she could no longer express emotion naturally. Everything had to be conveyed through voice and hand gestures." Unlike some stars who retreated from public view as surgical changes accumulated, Gabor remained defiantly visible well into her 80s, even as her appearance became increasingly artificial. This visibility created a visual record of progressive surgical modification rarely documented so thoroughly. What happened to Zsa Zsa's face wasn't just about vanity. explained a cultural historian specializing in Hollywood's relationship with aging. It reflected her genuine belief that a woman's value was inextricably tied to youth and beauty. She was both victim and perpetrator of Hollywood's most destructive myth. In her later years, after a serious car accident and declining health limited her public appearances, Gabor became increasingly reclusive. Her final photographs show a face so altered by decades of surgical intervention that it bore little resemblance to the vibrant beauty who had once captivated Hollywood. The cruel irony is that the procedures meant to preserve her famous beauty ultimately erased it, the historian continued. In trying to remain forever young, she lost the very features that had made her uniquely Zaza. While Gabor's transformation reflected a lifelong commitment to glamour at any cost, our next subject represents something perhaps more tragic, a handsome leading man whose natural good looks were ultimately betrayed by his attempts to maintain them.
I certainly have.
A lot of women, and you have said in your autobiography that you did...
Tony Curtis, from Hollywood heartthrob to waxy immobility. In the 1950s, Tony Curtis embodied a new kind of male beauty in Hollywood, sensual, almost pretty, with dark curls and sensitive features that made him perfect for both action roles and romantic leads. His appearance in films like Sweet Smell of Success and Some Like It Hot established him as one of cinema's most attractive leading men, which makes his later transformation all the more startling. From matinee idol to wax statue, remarked a film critic who interviewed Curtis in his later years, it was as though someone had attempted to create a Tony Curtis mannequin with only a passing familiarity with human anatomy. Curtis's surgical alterations became noticeable in the 1980s, when he was in his 60s, relatively late compared to many of his contemporaries. The initial work appeared minor, perhaps a subtle eye lift or minor facelift, but as the decade progressed, the changes became increasingly dramatic and less natural looking. Male plastic surgery presents unique challenges, explained a Beverly Hills surgeon who specializes in male facial procedures. Men have thicker skin, stronger facial muscles, and more prominent facial features. When surgeons approach male faces with techniques designed for women, the results can look particularly artificial. By the 1990s, Curtis's appearance had transformed dramatically. His once expressive face took on a smooth, tight quality that contrasted sharply with his age. His skin developed the shiny, stretched appearance characteristic of multiple facelifts, while his features seemed somehow flattened and less dimensional. What made Curtis's transformation particularly noteworthy was that it coincided with his artistic renaissance as a painter. As he developed a well-received second career creating colorful, expressionist artworks, his own face was becoming increasingly inexpressive, a contradiction that didn't escape critics. There was something poignant about watching him discuss his emotionally expressive paintings with a face that could barely move, noted an art critic who covered a Curtis gallery opening in the early 2000s. It was as though all his expressiveness had been channeled from his face into his canvas. Curtis never publicly acknowledged his surgical procedures, which was typical for male stars of his generation. This silence created an uncanny disconnect. Audiences were expected to somehow not notice the dramatic changes to one of Hollywood's most famous faces. He seemed genuinely confused when interviewers reacted to his appearance, recalled a journalist who interviewed Curtis for a film retrospective. It was as if he looked in the mirror and still saw the young man from Some Like It Hot, not understanding that surgical intervention had created something entirely different. In his final years, Curtis's appearance stabilized into what one unkind critic called a permanently surprised version of himself. The handsome features that had made him a star were still vaguely discernible, but altered in ways that made his face seem like an approximate recreation rather than a natural evolution of his younger self. The tragedy wasn't just what happened to his face, reflected a longtime friend after Curtis's death in 2010. It was that he never needed it in the first place. He would have been a handsome older man naturally. Instead, he'll be remembered partially for an appearance that became a distraction from his genuine talents. While Curtis's transformation reflected the particular challenges of male plastic surgery, our next subject demonstrates how even the most natural, wholesome beauty could be erased by the pursuit of eternal youth.
Gift. So I did the commercial, and he kept his word, and he gave my girlfriend a commercial.
Linda Evans, Dynasty, Disaster, and the Destruction of Natural Beauty. Linda Evans wasn't strictly a Golden Age star, but she bridges Hollywood eras, beginning her career when many studio system players still dominated, then achieving her greatest fame in the 1980s as Crystal Carrington on Dynasty. What makes her case particularly instructive is the stark contrast between her natural beauty in early roles and the dramatically altered appearance that emerged in later years. She chased youth and lost herself, observed a Hollywood makeup artist who worked with Evans at different points in her career. Few transformations have been so complete or so unnecessary. She began with the kind of natural beauty that would have aged wonderfully. Evans's early career in the 1960s showcased a fresh-faced, naturally beautiful young woman with delicate features and expressiveness that made her perfect for television. As she reached middle age in the late 1970s, subtle changes suggested minor procedures, perhaps a conservative eye lift or small facial adjustments. It was after Dynasty ended in the late 1980s that the more dramatic changes began. As Evans entered her late 40s and early 50s, her appearance began transforming in ways that alarmed even surgery-friendly Hollywood observers. The procedures didn't enhance her natural beauty, they replaced it, noted an entertainment journalist who interviewed Evans multiple times over decades. Each time I saw her, she looked less like herself and more like someone's approximation of what they thought Linda Evans should look like. By the 2000s, Evans's transformation was complete. Her once delicate features had been supplanted by an overfilled, tight appearance that bore little resemblance to her younger self. Her cheeks appeared unnaturally full, her lips disproportionately augmented, and her skin stretched to eliminate natural contours. What made Evans's transformation particularly sad was that it coincided with her retreat from Hollywood into a more spiritual, nature-centered lifestyle in Washington state. As she publicly embraced authenticity and natural living, her appearance reflected the opposite values: artificial intervention and rejection of natural aging. There was a profound disconnect between her words and her face, observed a writer who profiled Evans for a women's magazine in the early 2000s. She would speak beautifully about accepting life's natural cycles while wearing physical evidence of having done everything possible to halt those cycles. Evans herself has rarely commented directly on her changed appearance, though in a 2014 interview, she obliquely acknowledged some regrets. "I've made mistakes, trusted the wrong people sometimes, but that's part of life's journey." The most poignant aspect of Evans's transformation is imagining the alternative, how her delicate natural beauty might have aged without intervention. With her bone structure and features, she likely would have become a striking older woman whose appearance reflected a full life rather than a desperate attempt to freeze time. "She's the case that makes me angriest," admitted a prominent Hollywood photographer who documented many aging stars. "Some people needed a little help as they aged. Linda Evans needed nothing. She was beautiful. Full stop. What happened to her face wasn't enhancement, it was erasure." While Evans's transformation reflects the voluntary pursuit of an idealized image, our next subject suffered something more tragic: a catastrophic surgical disaster at the hands of an unqualified practitioner.
Strangers to Elvis Presley's house?
Absolutely not.
There'd be other people there, too.
Priscilla Presley, betrayed by beauty's black market. Priscilla Presley occupied a unique position in American culture. Not quite a traditional star, but American royalty through her marriage to Elvis. Her striking beauty was famous worldwide, making her later facial disaster all the more shocking. "She trusted the wrong surgeon and paid in the mirror," said a Beverly Hills plastic surgeon who later consulted with Presley about correction options. What happened to her wasn't vanity, it was victimization. Presley's natural beauty in the 1960s and 1970s was extraordinary. High cheekbones, almond-shaped eyes, and delicate features that photographers loved. As she entered her 40s, she reportedly had minor, conventional work done, subtle refinements that maintained her appearance without dramatic changes. The disaster occurred around 2003 when Presley, like several other celebrities, became involved with an unlicensed practitioner offering what was billed as low-risk cosmetic enhancements. Instead of legitimate fillers, this individual allegedly injected industrial-grade silicone, similar to what might be used to lubricate auto parts, into Presley's face. It was essentially mechanical lubricant being injected into human tissue, explained a cosmetic dermatologist familiar with similar cases. The damage is catastrophic and largely irreversible. The substance doesn't just sit there. It migrates, it hardens, it destroys surrounding tissues. The results were immediately alarming. Presley's face became asymmetrical, with uneven contours and a hardened, unnatural appearance. Her once perfect cheekbones looked distorted, her smile became lopsided, and the smooth contours of her face were replaced by irregular bulges. What makes Presley's case particularly heartbreaking is that, unlike stars who pursued excessive surgery, she was allegedly seeking only minor refinements. Instead, she became the victim of what amounted to medical assault by an unqualified practitioner preying on aging celebrities. The person who did this wasn't a doctor, he was a criminal, stated the Beverly Hills surgeon. And celebrities like Priscilla were particularly vulnerable because they needed discretion and were often referred through trusted social circles. The man responsible, Daniel Serrano, was eventually arrested and served time for practicing medicine without a license. But for victims like Presley, the damage was largely permanent. While some improvement was possible through corrective procedures, much of the industrial silicone could not be safely removed. Presley has shown remarkable courage in continuing public appearances despite her altered appearance. Rather than hiding away, she has maintained her charity work and occasional entertainment projects, tacitly acknowledging through her visibility that what happened to her could happen to others. Once elegant, later puffy, uneven, and overworked, observed an entertainment journalist who interviewed Presley before and after the disaster. But what impresses me is that she refused to disappear. There's dignity in continuing to live publicly after such a visible trauma. While Presley's case represents outright medical fraud, our next subject demonstrates how even conventional procedures can erase the very qualities that made a star distinctive. Carol Baker, Hollywood's baby doll repackaged. Carol Baker exploded into public consciousness with her provocative role in Baby Doll, 1956, where her unique beauty, sensual yet somehow innocent, made her an instant star and sex symbol. Her distinctive features, particularly her full lips and expressive eyes, set her apart from other blonde bombshells of the era. Those same distinctive features would eventually be transformed beyond recognition. She was Hollywood's forbidden fruit until she tampered with the package, remarked a film historian specializing in 1950s cinema. Few stars have so completely erased what made them special in the first place. Baker's early career showcased a natural, distinctive beauty. Though conventionally attractive, she wasn't a standard-issue Hollywood blonde. She possessed unique features that distinguished her from contemporaries like Marilyn Monroe or Jane Mansfield. Her slightly fuller lips, wider-set eyes, and expressiveness made her memorable and instantly recognizable. As her American career waned in the late 1960s, Baker relocated to Europe, becoming a star in Italian films. When she returned to Hollywood in the late 1970s and 1980s for occasional roles, observers noted subtle changes to her appearance. Refinements typical of aging stars seeking to maintain their looks. But by the 1990s and 2000s, the changes had become dramatically more pronounced. Baker's once distinctive features were replaced by what one critic unkindly called generic plastic surgery face, the standardized appearance that results when unique features are surgically modified toward a conventional ideal. The tragedy of Carol Baker's transformation wasn't just that it looked artificial, explained the film historian, it's that it erased everything distinctive about her face. The full lips that were once her trademark became tight and overly lifted. The expressive eyes became perpetually surprised-looking. She went from being uniquely Carol Baker to being anonymously done. What makes Baker's case particularly poignant is that her original features, especially her naturally full lips, were characteristics that later generations of actresses would actually seek through surgical enhancement. She already possessed what others would pay to acquire, yet chose to alter these very features. It's as though she was running from her own trademark, observed a Hollywood makeup artist who worked with Baker in the 1990s. The industry spends millions creating distinctive looks, and then the people who naturally have them spend fortunes erasing them. Baker has generally avoided discussing her surgical choices, though in rare interviews she has acknowledged the pressure Hollywood places on women to maintain youthful appearances. This silence has left her transformation as a visual testament to changing beauty standards and the impossible expectations placed on aging female stars. The cruel irony is that she might have aged into an elegant, distinctive older woman if she'd left her face alone, reflected a casting director who knew Baker in different phases of her career. Instead, she became part of that army of former stars with identical tight, shiny faces. their uniqueness surgically removed along with their wrinkles. While Baker's transformation erased her distinctive features, our final subject represents perhaps the most complete disconnect between vibrant persona and frozen features. Ann-Margret, the fire performer with the frozen face. Few stars embodied vibrant energy and sensuality more completely than Ann-Margret. From her breakout in Bye Bye Birdie, 1963, through classics like Viva Las Vegas with Elvis Presley, her appeal was built on explosive energy, expressive features, and a vibrant persona that practically ignited the screen, which makes her later transformation particularly jarring. The fire was still there, but the face wasn't, observed an entertainment journalist who interviewed Ann-Margret multiple times across decades. Watching her try to express her naturally vivacious personality through features that barely moved created a strange cognitive dissonance. Ann-Margret's natural beauty in the 1960s and early 1970s was distinctive and expressive. Slightly feline eyes, high cheekbones, and an extraordinarily mobile face that could shift from sensual to comical in an instant. Her performances relied heavily on this expressiveness, making her later surgical choices particularly counterproductive to her gifts. The changes to her appearance became noticeable gradually. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, subtle tightening suggested conservative procedures. But as the 1990s progressed into the 2000s, the modifications became increasingly dramatic, her once expressive face taking on the tight, smooth quality characteristic of multiple procedures. What made Ann-Margret's case particularly noticeable was the contrast between her physical energy and her facial immobility, explained a television director who worked with her in the 2000s. She still moved with incredible vitality, dancing, gesturing, fully energetic in her body. But above the neck, everything had become strangely static. This disconnect created particular challenges for directors working with her in later years. The dynamism that had defined her early performances was still present in her body and voice, but her face could no longer provide the expressive punctuation that had been central to her performing style. "We had to adapt how we filmed her," the director continued. "More movement, more full body shots, less reliance on the close-ups that would have worked beautifully with her natural face, but now highlighted the immobility of her features." The modifications were particularly evident in her smile, which had once been wide and expressive, but became noticeably constrained. The natural movement of her cheeks and eyes during laughter, once so characteristic of her appeal, was replaced by a more limited range of expression. Multiple lifts and Botox made her nearly unrecognizable in later TV appearances, noted a longtime fan who maintained an archive of her performances. If you showed someone only her face from a 2010 interview, they likely wouldn't identify her as Ann-Margret. But the moment she moved or spoke, her essential spirit was unmistakable. What makes Ann-Margret's transformation particularly poignant is that, unlike some stars who retreated from public life as they aged, she continued performing with incredible energy well into her 70s. This created a visual record of a vibrant performer trying to express a full emotional range through increasingly limited facial mobility. "There's something almost heroic about her refusal to dim her light," reflected a choreographer who worked with her in her later years. "She still performs with the energy of someone decades younger. It's just tragic that the procedures meant to maintain her youthful appearance ended up limiting the very expressiveness that made her special."